Dan, how you doing?
Doing all right, Jeff.
Good.
How are you?
Nice to be back in the same
I thought you weren't coming. Look
That
at
was
the weather.
No, I'm only 3 miles away.
I don't know about you guys. Is it ready to handle the ice or not?
Oh, no.
Good job.
Yeah.
Welcome. Glad you could make it.
I had originally I thought, I can ride my bike or walk, but it's a little too cold.
Yeah, we tried just walking to the restaurant last night. 2 people fell back.
Yeah.
It was really bad.
Yeah, Aaron invited me to come along, and I just didn't do it.
I have to run.
Stuff. Okay, cheers.
Good morning, everybody. Please take a seat so we can get going. People outside, please do come in and take a seat so we can start the meeting. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Happy New Year. Welcome to the 2018 ESIP winter meeting. Thank you. Yes. Thank you for coming here and being with us. This year marks the 20th anniversary of ESIP. So it's really a delightful, for us all to be here together to reflect, all these years, all the accomplishments this community has achieved over 20 years, and to celebrate 20 years of making data matter. So really love to see you all here, and so we can celebrate, together, and welcome 2018 as well. So to start with, I'm really thankful to our sponsors. We are grateful for their ongoing support, continuous support, not just for this meeting, but also to enable us to do our work throughout the years. So our sponsors include NASA, NOAA, and USGS. We are also grateful to ESRI for being the bronze sponsor, and also to the FigShares, IdealScale, as well as Amazon Web Services for the support of ESIP's infrastructure, providing in-kind services to us. So you will hear ESRI as well as our sponsors during the State of the Federation tomorrow morning. I hope you guys all can make it. And this year's lanyard is sponsored by AGU, and also not just the winter meeting, but also the summer meeting. We are grateful to have that sponsorships, and I would like to invite Shelley Stoll, the AGU director for the data program, to talk a little bit about that lanyard.
Welcome to ESIP Winter. So we're so excited to be able to be a partner with ESIP. AGU is incredibly delighted with the ability that we've had between both AGU's convening powers and ESIP's incredible way to solve problems and create new solutions for researchers. So we are excited to provide the lanyard this year, and we're really excited about this summer's design as well, which is still in the works. But I want to highlight how important this partnership is to AGU. We have had several years of providing a data fair to the researchers at our meetings. We're going to do that this February, the Ocean Science meeting, and ESIP is the power behind the data fair. You are the ones that are actually creating that connection to the researchers, and we need you to do that, and we are so delighted you're willing to. And this last year we did the data help desk. This was a brilliant idea. Dora, who's here, had this idea during one of the SE meetings and brought it up, and ESIP made it happen. That was just fantastic, and we are excited to be able to do that. So thank you so much for being a partner with AGU.
Thank you, Shirley. So moving on, I would like to also show appreciations and thank the 2017 ESIP leadership. For those who are here in the program committee as well as the board, can you please stand up? And let's give them a round of applause. And thank you for your service. Thanks, Aaron. Moving on, and we'd like to welcome the 2018 Student Fellows. We have one returning student fellow, Matt, and then 4 new students. The student fellows, will you please stand up? So people know who you are. We'll be supporting all the clusters, help running, this year's activities. So thank you. So moving on is, we are grateful to our amazing staff. Our executive director, Erin Wilkinson, she will be giving you some logistics later, and our lab director, Annie Burgess, Ruth here, our community architect, as well as Andy Keys and Dan Keys, our logistics and operations. Are they all here? Dan is here, Bruce here, and Aaron is here. So, welcome. I'll pass it on to Aaron to run the logistics.
Thanks, Emily, and good morning, everybody. I'm happy to see that so many of you were able to brave your neighborhood streets and make it in, and then brave the icy sidewalks here. Hopefully there are no broken bones. So as Emily mentioned, this is ESIP's 20th year. We started actually May 5th, was the first meeting, 1998 in Washington, D.C. And I wanted to get the blood flowing this morning. And I wondered if you came to a meeting in the first 5 years. So that's through 2003. So it's really pretty remarkable, and we've got some longtime ESIP members here. And if your first meeting was in the last 5 years, I wonder if you can stand up. Which is also really remarkable. We've had, I think, this interesting balance of longtime ESIP members that continue to support ESIP and promote this vision of being a leader in collecting, stewarding, science data. And we've got so many new faces coming to this meeting. So I think that the community is really what you bring to it, and so I hope that everybody can take a minute to just think about what you hope to get out of the meeting and what you hope to contribute. And so I think ESIP is a pretty special place that survived for 20 years because it's bringing people together across sector, across agency, around and across the data life cycle, around these common problems that we'll tackle in breakout sessions and we'll talk about in the plenary today. So things can get a little bit crazy at ESIP and seem kind of chaotic because of the grassroots nature, but we do have a shared agenda. We have a strategic plan that we've been working our way through. We've been using the the strategic goals to provide this umbrella for coordinating activities around. So this year, as we celebrate the 20th anniversary, we're also celebrating or working on data for achieving America, really focusing on this third goal of promoting techniques to articulate and measure the socioeconomic value and benefit of data technology, which is a mouthful. And I'll say that this has been one of those goals that's been in the strategic plan for probably 15 years, if not 20. And it seems like the time is right to finally talk about it. I'm really looking forward to our speakers this morning because there's some interesting work going on here, and I think we're going to make progress this year around that topic. The other thing that ties ESIP together is the values. And, you know, these are sort of the buzzy sounding words that I think what we know is that from some research that was done in the Funding Friday project by Ruth and Reed Bohm, people are coming to ESIP because they're curious. They are getting something out of it for their career. They're creating new partnerships that are driving things like interesting SE sessions at AGU. So there's a lot of community-driven collegial activity that happens here. And I just want to remind people that we are a respectful place and things can get heated, but to remember to be kind. So just a quick overview of the week at a glance. We're here at the Welcome in the Plenary. We'll break at 10:30. We'll come back for 3 more talks, and then we'll have breakout sessions all afternoon. Tomorrow morning, we have the State of the Federation and the Assembly meeting. And often this has been looked at as sort of the boring business part. But I would encourage you, if you haven't been to the State of the Federation, to come tomorrow morning at 8:30. And actually at 8 o'clock, we'll have a breakfast with new people and with the ambassadors. So good time to meet people if you're new or if you're returning. But the State of the Federation is a crash course in all things going on in ESIP, both in the committees and the collaboration areas, as well as from our sponsors and from our partners around the Federation. So it's a good kind of synopsis of what's going on here. Then we'll have a plenary tomorrow morning, and then the poster session and reception tomorrow evening for dinner. But tomorrow there'll be a reception. And then Thursday is all-day breakouts. So the Wi-Fi code is Earth Science, all one word, all lowercase. And all of our meeting information can be found on Sketch. Added to Picture. This is our portal. We've transitioned from our own homegrown activities on to Share. So this is where you can find meeting content. And I would encourage you, if you are contributing meeting content to, please add it to Share. And then finally, we have a pretty active Slack community. And so this is a place to stay in touch during the meeting, but really between meetings is where most of the activity happens. We tweet. And if you are tweeting about the meeting, we would really appreciate it if you would use the ESIP hashtag. So the last bit of logistics is one to thank the Visioneers. So Visioneers is the voluntary planning committee for planning work group for ESIP's meetings, and they're always looking for ways to make ESIP meetings better and to make ESIP better in general. And this year it's been led by Steve Diggs, who is our incoming vice president of Human Skills. So I really appreciate their effort in spearheading this. And one of the things that the Visioneers has added in the last 2 meetings, so the summer meeting and again here, is this ESIP ambassador idea. So if you're one of the people who stood up for having been to meetings in the first 5 years, if you've been to a bunch of ESIP meetings or even just 1 or 2, if you want to grab a button that says "Ask me about ESIP," then people with stars on their badge who might be the first time at this meeting can know who might be friendly or I think we're all in English. But you know, look for these badges if you've got specific questions, wondering how something works, and then if you have logistical or there's something about the meeting that you better find the staff. We are here to make this a really productive meeting for you all, and I want, you know, we're here to help. So anything we can do, let us know. And then the last thing I'll say about Visioneers is that they're going to be working on the 20th anniversary activities. And so if that's something that you're interested in, I encourage you to join their calls, and they'll start probably at the end of January. So with that, I'd like to invite Brian Reed to come up and introduce our first speaker. And Brian Reed is part of a new ESIP member just this time.
Aaron has asked me to introduce the first speaker, Dr. Ann Bertasker. I've known Ann for more than a decade, and currently Ann is the Vice President for Land, Water, and Nature and Resources for the Future, highly regarded think tank here in Washington, D.C. Now, this is not Ann's first appearance at ESIP. She first appeared 5 years and 1 day ago, back in 2013. This very same conference, except that we were having this in downtown DC at that time. So prior to RFF, Ann was the USDA Deputy Undersecretary for Research, Education, and Economics. And for those in the room who have been dealing with the US GCRP, which is the US Global Change Research Program, you would appreciate that Ann was recently, until she left for Resources for the Future, she was the chair of the SGCR, the Subcommittee on Global Change Research, under OSTP, right? And so Ann actually chaired that committee, and it's no surprise that the White House chose Ann to lead the committee because of the vision that she brings and the passion that she brings to issues involving observation data and also agriculture and livelihoods. And the way that she has expressed her vision and the passion at USDA was that Ann was instrumental in creating and championing this thing called the USDA LTAR, which is the Long-Term Agro-Ecosystem Research Network. Some folks in this room might have heard of the LTER. This is the LTAR, Agro-Ecosystem Research. And she was the one who championed it within the USDA. And where this intersects with the interests of this room are that in the USDA, Ann's vision was to foster a network of observatories, agro-ecosystem observatories that are interoperable, that share data, and that integrate data from each site up to the nation in order to inform resource management decisions and also inform policy, right? And so that's where Ann was looking at the LTAR. And so she has brought her vision even to talks at the National Academies of Sciences, where she would give talks about her vision of early career folks who are interested in agriculture and data-intensive sciences as applied agriculture, and how to make agriculture sexy, right? And so it's with great pleasure that I would like to introduce Dr. Bertasker, who has this great vision. Speaking of great, making agriculture great again. And we'll turn the mic over to Ann.
Quite an introduction. Thank you, Brian. And really great pleasure to be here and to be part of your 20th anniversary celebration. I was really turning over my mind how I wanted to frame this particular conversation with you, what kind of remarks I might make. And I was fortunate to be on a panel at the Global Earth Observation Plenary, the GEO Plenary recently, that had the same subject. And so I was trying to tee off that a little bit. But I'm also going back to my roots, I'm a forest ecosystem ecologist, and I've actually missed forestry for the last 8 years as I was Deputy Undersecretary. And so I'm probably going to be less about ag today, more about forest and natural resources. But the concepts are the same. And I really do appreciate the plug for the LTARs with direct homage to LTERs. That was the whole construct around how we should create these systems that are in managed environments as well as in a natural environment. So anyway, it's been a great ride, and I'm especially now pleased to be in the future all of 3 months and 2 days. So let me get started on that, and I guess the this. Everyone seems to be a little different. So basically, my overall message, systems are not static, and that we're building on a history of data gathering, analysis, structure, that can continue to be updated and modified and modernized based on our emerging technologies and new questions. But the other thing that I guess I really wanted to keep coming back to is the scale of the work that we do, and that not everything needs the nth degree of resolution in order to address a policy need. And so if we look on this sort of this trajectory from plot-based type work, in situ, highly intensive, to much broader scale at a more national, global scale, using satellite imagery, and then everything in between, that there are different, not only the scale of time, but also the scale of space that allows us to address policy questions, and not only in smaller scales, but also in the larger ones, and how you bring those two together. So this is what I'm going to try to walk through, and some of the concepts within. So I'm going to, as I said, I'm going back to my roots. Well, actually, I'm going back to the Forest Service roots in terms of their, really, probably the best long-standing data set that exists for forests in the world, with the exception possibly of Prussia, now Germany. And that's the Forest Inventory Analysis Program, effectively established in 1928, but really starting to do work in 1930s. It's been a continuous inventory since 1930. But in the early years, it was really designed to be an above-ground timber production system. So DVH, total volume, your standard mensuration techniques. And one of the messages I'll be going through is the evolution of something that is traditional, historical, into something that has become very nimble and really addressing today's questions. But it is the only comprehensive inventory for the entire forest of the United States, from private lands to public lands. And it has continued to grow in the sense of the user community feeding back to the design of the program to continue to address new policy issues. It has approximately 125,000 plots in the 3-mile grid. It's a very stable system, it's a very diverse system, and it's something that we can continue to build from. And so that little map that I show in there is an example where the inventory data are used on the Fish Lake National Forest to actually inform planning. So this direct connection at the local level of the data to the manager's needs. I said it's nimble, and it's nimble in the sense that it has started in terms of plot base to be very above ground timber, but has grown to be able to add additional measures. And so some years ago, and this is actually a slightly old set of slides, but it's still fairly current in terms of the content. But we started being asked questions about, well, what about other measures? When we were talking about ecosystem management and biodiversity concerns, so you've got this whole plot network out there. What else can we get from those plots that might actually be used to address other questions? And so we started looking at overlaying a multi-species inventory on that. Can you use that same plot system to add other variables? And what would be the scale of adding those variables so that you would be able to get new information that was relevant to emerging questions on those forests, from where you have, again, this very stable plot system where the background inventory has continued to be collected. So that in itself was a really major breakthrough, and that was probably, I'd say, 15 or so years ago. And then what we started realizing is that, well, you've got biomass, and you've got it, the dimensions of that biomass, and you did a conversion to carbon, you could actually start building a carbon inventory using that exact same data. And in fact, that's what started developing under the coal, which is the coal model, which is the carbon online estimation tool. And again, it's taking what is a very stable system, but now adding new questions to it to be able to convert that biomass into carbon and to get a fairly coarse filter but steady assessment of how much carbon is in the forests of the United States. And since we also know the species composition at this scale, we're able to connect the dots to the pine forest or the conifer forest or the Doug fir forest. So you're actually starting to now inform a much higher order question regarding carbon. Now we still haven't kicked the can down the street in terms of below ground inventory, and I'll come back to that. But in terms of above ground, it's stability, but also nimbleness. So I think is the hallmark of these kinds of inventories and how you continue to improve it based on policy needs. Why did we need to do this? Well, EPA had to start reporting upward on the carbon stocks in the United States. So it was a really easy way for us to convert our forest measures into carbon measures. And then at a global scale, FAO takes the same reporting that we do on our forest inventory, makes a world map of global forests, and has now added that carbon inventory to the work that they're doing. So again, you have the scaling opportunity based on the same data, same system. And then I guess the newest emerging question, which actually probably started more like 20 years ago, and this is, well, what's going on in the urban system? Because we knew that many cities were starting to add trees. We've had a very long program in the United States of tree planting, green spaces in cities. But we started getting data on the quality of life changes that occurred with that there is stormwater runoff management potential among those trees. We started having places like Baltimore, which is, as you can see, Baltimore City Tree Canopy, and their Parks for People organization that we work with, where they made a commitment to plant 1 million trees. Well, what does that do to the structure of the urban forest? And yet, urban forests, because of the nature of urban systems, are linear, and a plot-based system is not necessarily designed for that. So over this period of time, we've been able to tweak the system to be able to capture more urban forest information. And so now not only do we have where trees are located, but also what the overall canopy looks like, and we've been able to capture information on carbon response within urban areas, energy changes, and being able to mitigate heat and cooling effects because of those urban forests, and being able to build upon, the basic inventory structure into addressing these new questions. And the fact that many cities have already been established sustainable city programs, knowing what your tree canopy does, how it mitigates energy loss, how it manages or can mitigate stormwater runoff, has become very important and is real dollars to those cities. So basically, I think the message that I'm trying to convey from this is you start with the same base layer. It's somewhat static, it's very stable, but then you can start adding other things onto that based on new measures, new interpretations, a combination of in situ measures as well as remote sensing or aerial flight measures that give you characteristics that give you more information about that same system. And you can imagine that a particular manager would be really interested to know more about, for example, land use patterns. If you're going to make a decision about a national park or a national forest or a municipal park, what's the allocation of these different land uses, and how do you then manage those and provide regulations perhaps, or provide guidance on what's happening in those areas. In the whole distribution of agricultural lands and forest lands, one of the more interesting questions is water management. And we know that about 53% of surface-derived drinking water in the United States comes off our forests. To be able to manage those forests effectively actually helps improve water quality and quantity. Coupling that together with the urban systems, with the agricultural systems, and so this landscape analysis, looking at different combinations across that landscape, then becomes even more important to a manager at that scale, but also in terms of making smart investments and in municipal watersheds, for example, has been done in New York City and the Catskills example, and some of you may know about that already. So what I like about this graphic is this idea of layering and being able to to ask new questions is really dependent on how you bring in that new information, but it also assumes a sort of that stable base. And I really think that we have to keep recognizing that maybe this is a uniquely government investment that we have to keep being mindful of and steward. That it is because we can do that allows other questions to be asked. But who else is going to be able to provide that constant, well, effectively almost 90 years of constant measurement, except governmental sources who have that stability. So that's one of my ongoing concerns. All right, so building off that inventory and adding new information to it is something that we have continued to do. This is this map is actually built off of the overall forest mapping that we do through using the Landsat program, and it just creates a map of where forests are with no attribution. That's when you add the FIA data that you can actually then translate this green cover to what kinds of forests, where they're distributed. But you can also start asking other questions. For example, this one is where is the wildland-urban interface? And that's driven by how large a population center is there related to where the forests are. And it's kind of hard to see probably in the back, there are little red clusters there. And that's where you have a fairly high level of what is affectionately known as WUI. Well, and what difference does that make? Well, that intuitively that would be in wildfire-prone areas. That raises concerns about this interface between forest, land, and population, and we've had a lot of examples of that in California recently, but you can see that's really across the country, but also to do with water allocation. If you just were reading about the Apalachicola Bay concerns that are now going to the Supreme Court, it's how much can Atlanta take water out of the river system, draw it down so that it then is taken away from natural systems lower in the watershed. Being able to look at this relationship between the urban centers and the growth of those urban centers or the retreat and where you have natural systems allows you to address policy questions at a very, very, of course, a high scale in terms of more regional, sub-regional, and national questions. Another thing that we can do is start overlaying what is produced by our Forest Health Protection Program that does overflights of 90% of the United States forests every year in various combinations and captures where you have major insect and disease outbreaks. Not only invasive species, but naturally occurring insects and diseases that are achieving epidemic condition. And so if you map those situations where you have a risk of, where you have occurrences of insects and diseases, translate that based on biology to the risk of mortality, which is what this map shows. It starts with the same base layer in terms of forest distribution, and then it adds on another data layer dealing with insect and disease prevalence. But then there's an algorithm that allows us to calculate the risk associated with those insects and diseases, and obviously raises some concerns for where you have dead dying trees, which then translates to safety issues, fire issues, etc. And this is actually fairly old. Actually, I think this is from 1995. But if you notice some of the areas of Idaho, western Montana, right about then, we're also getting some pretty big fires out there. So it's ended up being a fairly close predictor of where we should be thinking about wildland fire control, which is another policy issue. And so how you bring those bits and pieces together and what the policymakers do, the decision makers of those forest lands. And then another taking that from the insect disease to fire piece, this is just an example of how you are then able to translate the mortality factor where we know where there are frequent return intervals in certain types of forests. You overlay that on the vegetation type, and it shows you where the high risk, medium risk conditions are. And again, at a national or regional scale for policymaking, we should be able to look at this map. We should be thinking about putting our wildland fire resources, planning for that, and being able to, the deployment and during the fire is different than if you can anticipate where you need the resources, where we should be budgeting for. And you can imagine there'd be a whole host of different policy questions that would evolve from this kind of a treatment of the different data sets. So I guess again the message is, let's go back. The message is starting at the same place, being able to add the different layers, it adds richness to the policy decision, and allows you to keep making adjustments in terms of where you make your investments and where you make your resources. But I also wanted to reference perhaps the greatest, most nimble use of different kinds of remote sensing and in-situ meshes, and that's with regard to wildland fire response. So this is a whole different temporal scale. What I showed you before is a annual picture allows you to project out. But now what I want to talk about is what happens within a day, and when you do have an ignition, and what you have to be worried about with regard to that fire. And actually, before I get long into this, any fire folks in the room? That's good. Okay. Because I'm going to be very course level on this. But the point of this particular couple slides is that when we are dealing with wildland fire, we actually have a really rich history of unclassified and classified remote sensing, satellite imagery, fixed-wing aircraft, ground measures that are all coming together very quickly to be able to assess where the fire is, what's the intensity of spread, and most importantly, where do we need to deploy human assets and equipment to address those fires. And so some of the biggest investments in remote sensing from the USDA level in particular has been in developing the tools that allow us to be able to be this responsive. From manned aircraft, and that's the National Infrared Operations, is NIROPS, unmanned aircraft, satellite systems, and then our network, we continue to have this network of ground observation. Why? Because to be able to capture initial ignition when you see that first smoke and get out of this whole idea of getting out on fire by 10 a.m. is partly because we've got this network of people out there. One of the big questions is there a way to automate rather that approach so that you don't necessarily need towers and that other mechanism that could be used? And I think this is sort of a continual evolution of the wildland fire assessment process. And so in terms of the capabilities, in any given, when an event starts happening, the high resolution fire map products are actually created daily by 6 a.m. for the incident command. That's the team that will then decide how to deploy. So that rapid response means very rapid acquisition of information. It allows you to delineate the perimeter and active fire areas, which the little map on the lower left is showing you the overall dimensions of the fires and where the intensity is. You can identify the hot spots. You can identify areas which are outside that line that you may need to get ahead of, and then allows you to produce products, because here's what's happening. You've got this team of highly trained technical people in a room going through all this data. And then you have this woman or man on the outside waiting to deploy people, get them on the ground walking, sometimes by flights, and they need to have a map to show them where to go. Because by the time they get out there, the smoke is thick, they could be in bad weather conditions, they need to have a tangible product. So that ability to turn this information quickly, or the data quickly into information, is a real hallmark, I think, of the wildland fire community. And so it does allow you to then map, deploy, and get people out through very exact prescription on where they need to be and where they need to get the equipment and people out. Okay, so now I'm going to move on. So that's just an example of some of the work that we've been doing in terms of natural systems. But I did want to bring in one ag example, because this is also a good case where we have this combination of in situ observations and remote sensing. The G20 a few years ago requested that we establish the community of the G20 and the ag ministries to establish an ag monitoring observation system called AMIS, information system. And AMIS is really to focus on the 4 major commodity crops that exist globally. And if I get this right, wheat, rice, corn, and soybean. Why? Well, partly so that you would be able to have a stable platform of information that all the different countries would be aware of what is going on in those countries in terms of production. But more importantly, what the reason was with regard to global stability and in supply and demand of agricultural products. Because we knew that there are certain places where there will be an interruption in production. For example, a few years ago in the Ukraine, the wheat crop failed. Well, that is more than just the Ukrainian wheat crop failing. That is a global ramifications about wheat distribution of where wheat is coming from, where potential instability are in the country in terms of security. And so be able to have these major commodity crops looking out ahead to say, where are the vulnerable areas? Where are the areas that there may be destabilization in terms of national security? And of course, from a U.S. perspective, that has implications for us because we actually are a global producer of a lot of agricultural products. We can redistribute where those products go. We can be dealing with our private sector partners. So it became really an important part of the G20 plus a few other countries to be able to have this information on a ready basis. This also then generated a greater interest that was agreed to by GEO to establish GeoGLAM, which is a Global Earth Observation, Global Ag Monitoring Program. And it's a partnership with the University of Maryland, USDA, NASA, and the Foreign Ag Service, which USDA is really tracking where a lot of this production is going on. The beauty of the GeoGLAM as well as AMOS is not only are you looking at the most important crop from a stability standpoint, but it also is getting you first through remote sensing what is happening to the cropping systems around the globe at a very national, regional scale. Where there are failures, you can bring ground information, you can actually see where you have areas that are drying up or too much water and be able to have this national, this larger picture. But then you start bringing in local information. So every country has a collection of agricultural specialists who are gathering in-country data to overlay on top of that remote sensing data. And then you also have individuals who are actually literally going down to the wharf and talking to the shipping container people saying, well, you know, what are you seeing in terms of the movement of a particular crop right now? All of that in terms of personal observation, in-situ measures, national measures of different countries, and then this unbiased global picture that's produced through remote sensing gives you information on the country level, by crop type, by yield, and again, where the vulnerabilities are. But it also allows us to go beyond the 4 big commodity crops to more important regional crops. Now, and why is that important? Some of the most significant destabilization in the country recently, in, for example, Syria, is because you had a market failure and you had crop production failures that led to famine, shortage of food, and as that's probably one of the biggest determinants of where you have instability in the country is not having access to food. And so being able to get on ahead of that is something that this program is doing, but it also gives us a global picture of where weather patterns are changing production. If you start thinking about the different cropping systems and what needs to be adjusted from an irrigation perspective, perhaps, increasing investments in irrigation or using natural access to water systems, you start seeing that there's a lot of technological input that could go on. But it's again taking this larger picture from a policy perspective on where those ag systems are going. So the current GeoGLAM, as it says here, we've got imagery, NASA, country level data from Foreign Ag Service, analysis and assessment products through University of Maryland and their constant connecting to in-country folks. You have market analysis then that takes all of that and creates disaster reports, and then in real time allows us to take action from a USDA regulatory perspective, policy perspective, informing FAO, you just go on and on from in terms of the different collaborations that take place. And then what we want to move actually, and appreciate Brian mentioning the LTARs, because what we also want to better understand is can we connect the dots between, for example, weather changes, crop production, and how you might, from a research standpoint, change those practices. And so adding on the intensive work of the LTARs, adding on a lot more of our observatory networks. We've hoped to connect NEON, many of you know, the National Ecological Observatory Network, in some of the locations where they are, those in situ measures are giving a lot richer data about what's happening on site. So you couple this much more intense data acquisition through research with these more global systems, and hopefully your prediction about what is happening in the long run gets fine-tuned and gets a lot more accurate. And then I have to give a shout out to AgMed, which is the agricultural modeling intercomparison program that's been going on now for almost, I think it's almost a decade, where it's gathered, I think it's now 80 plus models from around the world where individual researchers have been looking at drivers of agricultural production from weather inputs, from other production inputs, to get at some global statement about what are the production models. So if you have this input of weather, if you have this input of other factors, can we then be predicting what the agricultural production is further out? So again, very robust, very exciting system, very dynamic, and lots of opportunities to add more information. So now I want to just move quickly to the emerging needs. So hopefully you see there's a building on history, there's a building on these very large data sets, there's very large connectivity at a national and global scale. But some of the most exciting work now is taking us down to the plant level program. And I really have to thank RPE and Joe Cornelius in particular for some of this information. But what they have done is they've done research for which some of you may be aware of, have established the gang tree. You can see it down in the lower right, which is full of sensors that are measuring all different aspects of plant biology and evapotranspiration and characteristics that creates that, that's a corn and sorghum plot in the upper right, that allows you to characterize the quality of the production, the chlorophyll, the ability to actually translate light into mass, according to different biophysical characteristics on the site. So soil moisture, soil depth, porosity, all sorts of other characteristics. 1 million data points per day per plant is actually being produced by this system. And it's a combination of a whole lot of different measures. What's exciting about this is I was out on this, I was actually out there in the ribbon cutting of the project, and they brought out five, I think, that were plant breeders. These are real farmers doing real plant breeding, thinking about the future of how they can be responding to climatic variability in real time. They got excited about this because they can take the outcome of this kind of work and more rapidly decide what are they going to plant this year to get maximum production, even in the face of changing climate conditions. So this whole issue of climatic adaptation and being resilient benefits not only from the science produced, which is very cool, and these sensor arrays, but also to the practical plant breeder who's trying to stay ahead of the curve and recognizing that things are changing and how we can maintain our production capacity even that's happening. So this, to me, is just an amazing connection of new technologies, sensors that have really their basis a lot in the satellite work that's done in multispectral scanning 20, 30 years ago, multispectral arrays, but now we bring it down to real world. In fact, the one thing I really loved about this plot, they had this little rover that walked up and down the rows and was getting real-time soil condition on terms of soil moisture. I mean, people irrigate to the driest part of the field. If you could change your irrigation pattern so you only water in the dry spots and don't have to worry about these larger areas, then you have you're using less water, but you're actually increasing your bottom line because you're not spending as much money. So anyway, a lot of interesting things going on in that world. And the next step is getting below ground. Because there's the one big unknown out there. What is happening in the below ground system? And so that brings me to the National Soil Moisture Network, which is another emerging activity that's being led by NRCS at USDA. Again, it's taking the same combination of in situ measures with models and remote sensing, but it is really trying to get at the below ground characterization of soil moisture so that you're a lot more precise connection between what's happening at the plant level and what's happening in the soil. And a whole bunch of different partners have been able to distribute the set of soil moisture measurement systems around the country, and Texas A&M has been really a part of that, which is the soil database. But this is for you. I want to show with you what the distribution of these sites are and how really rapidly it's become a system. And then finally, using remote sensing observations of NOAA and NASA, and working with other colleagues to be able to get not only from the site level, but then to build it up into much larger patterns of soil moisture. So the future, below ground, keep that in mind. All right, so I'm just going to end, I think, with just coming back to this idea that I hope you get a sense of that you have multiple approaches to technology. There's a lot of spatial and temporal questions that are associated with that from a policy perspective, but being able to nest these different systems allows us, I think, the flexibility to address a lot of those questions in both real time as well as in a predictive sense. And so I'm just going to leave you with my favorite picture using remote sensed data combined with real world tracking. This is tracking ship movement around the Pacific for 1 year. And what we used it for, they didn't use it for this, but what we used it for was what were the most vulnerable ports for prevention of invasive species movement around the world. And it's just, I think, a very pretty picture. But it gives us a lot of information. And poor Hawaii is out there. It's always in the middle of many of these issues. So with that, I'm going to end. I think I just hit my time, and we have time for questions, if I understand.
We do have time for questions. So if you could come up to the mics, because we are recording this, and ask questions. But Anne, I think really my favorite thing about this talk was, well, actually there were two, but was the unintended use of data, and I think you really hit it here. And all of the things you talked about, had one purpose and then are getting used for another. So Steve Young, and please introduce yourself.
I'm EPA retired. I'm an innovative company these days. And one issue that, of course, has been a big one has been topsoil loss. And I'm interested in whether you've seen any good activities gathering data more systematically about loss of topsoil. I've seen some wild figures that are around over the years, and it clearly is an important issue. But are you seeing effective sensing programs to try to put better numbers on that issue?
Yeah, great question with regard to soils, and no, we are not going into another Dust Bowl era, but there are clearly areas, geographic areas around the country that seem to be having a higher soil erosion potential or occurrence than others, and that's part of what the NRCS has really been taking on with their soil health initiative, is to have a much more comprehensive monitoring and real-time monitoring rather than just the soil survey plots where they have the traditional go back periodically and capture what's happening in the soil profile. Be a little more nimble about what are the characteristics of that soil. That's why the soil moisture network, I think, is important, as well as being able to get below ground carbon. They've actually recently created a infrared in situ measure for below ground carbon, so using some of the same soil plots. Now that doesn't necessarily get at the erosion, and I think this is where we also have a lot of nutrient management programs, and if there's a way we have just started talking about this, coupling those nutrient management, which are really capturing overland flow with some of these other characteristics. To me, it gets a little confusing because of so many different variables, but it is a good question for them to be adding to that system.
Hi, Cindy Parr, National Ag Library, USDA. You've done a great job inspiring us with the directions that science and policy are going. I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about the challenges that the folks in this room can help address with respect to the changing infrastructures for the data, or the technology, and that sort of thing. So basically, what are the potential barriers to this bright future?
Very good point. Well, I guess perhaps the greatest barrier is the willingness for government entities who are the most stable in funding to invest in data systems and data infrastructure. Now, I would say on a good note, on a positive note, the LTAR system that was mentioned earlier learned from LTER, which if you followed LTER, it took them almost 20 years before they started thinking of themselves as a network and creating a data infrastructure and brought them all together. So the LTAR has actually approached the establishment of them with this idea of having an information architecture, a data system built in so that things can start coming together. I think that's one of the real priorities. Sadly, I have to say that I was with government 27 years, actually 30 years altogether, and we talked about having national investment in monitoring that entire time, and we continue to not have that supported. And it seems to me that it's all it's the funding the base infrastructure around these systems. It's not the glitzy research, it's in some ways the static, the boring in terms of flashiness, but you have to have the data structure, you have to have the way to manage that structure, you need to have the monitoring to get the data in order to do all this other stuff. And I think we just need to keep pushing that message out there, getting our leadership to recognize that they are not going to get answers to some of these questions unless they do make those kinds of investments. I have been very heartened by some of the work towards the end of the Obama administration, where we began moving towards open data, open access policies, where there was a real push to start interconnecting the different data sets and systems of different agencies. I mean, I actually am very proud of USDA's efforts in their Ag Data Commons and the Digital Data Commons to use a portal system approach to move a lot of the data that we have. I mean, you can imagine as a department, they're 150 some years old. They've been collecting data that entire time. How do you bring all that together in a way that is useful? So being able to cluster that, I think, continues to be a priority. But it's a critically important. You're absolutely right. It's just really hard to keep the pressure on, and that is what has to be happening. Somebody enlightened at the highest levels. And actually, there was a brief time where Jim Connaughton at CEQ was pushing us all to have one integrated data system, and then the administration changed, and he was gone, so we couldn't do that.
Great. So I think we have time for one more quick question.
Hi, Ann. Thanks for your talk. I'm Sudhir with Esri. So I just had a quick worry about, like, talked about some of the problems or the challenge that we have, during the data into information quickly for the Wi-Fi work, right? So in the first slide or two, we just talk about like the challenges that we're having with getting the data into the information on time. So with coming, and in my prior work, when I was working with the University of California in Merced, I was doing wildfire forecasting work for Forest Service, and we had challenges of getting the cause of the fire, especially the ignition, because that's the time we didn't know what was the cause of the fire. And so we were sort of like simulating the cause of the fire. But now with the coming, like, the GOES with the GIS sensor, which sort of brings in much more capabilities in the wildfire forecasting, how do you see the future of moving off the line? I mean, taking the short span of time that the users on the ground, they can use on the fire products, quickly turning the data into information using some sort of platform or any venue.
Yeah, that's a real interesting challenge, because part of it is continuing to improve the quality of the information. And actually, what I didn't show is a graphic that shows how many different fires we could not get information on because of weather. The whole development of technologies is to be able to see through any interferences, to capture that information quickly, but also then to be able to translate it into a product usable. And I think we still are stuck a little bit in that you need to have an experienced user at one end to take the technology and the information and then translate it to a forest manager or to a user, versus being able to have all of that invisible and is immediately transferred into a data product it's usable by somebody who maybe is not as trained. And there's a couple of examples that in the urban areas, the iTree tool that was designed by actually Forest Service and Dave Nowak. If you go behind the scenes, the model, the complexity of the models and all the information input is really high. but you don't see that as the user. You're given this derived product that allows you to say how much water is stormwater runoff is affected by this tree, and it's immediately calculated. You get an answer, and you don't need to worry about the back. And I guess that's where I think we need to keep moving some of this technology even as it gets more advanced. So I don't know if that answers the question, but it is a very complicated. I guess that is one of the challenges is we're technologists, we're researchers, but we're not communication specialists necessarily, and somehow we need to be able to translate that outcome just getting it into information that's usable rather than the products that we normally produce. And actually with that, I am going to make one commercial remark. This afternoon we have a breakout session on one of the projects that Resources for the Future is doing called Valuables, valuing remote sensing information and these kinds of systems. And a big part of that is communication. And Bethany Levy is right over here, and she's going to be part of that. But I would strongly encourage those of you who are interested in that kind of thing to dive into that, because we're early in the project and we're also continuing to figure out how do you convey this complex information in a way that's useful. Thank you very much. I appreciated being here.
Thank you.
I'd like to invite Christine White up to introduce our next speaker.
I have the pleasure of introducing Ann Hill Plenaries. Ann is the founder and CEO of Radiant Earth, a nonprofit organization working to aggregate the world's open Earth imagery and provide access and education on its use to the global development community. Prior to launching Radiant Earth, Ann served as president and CEO of Fugro Earth Data, CEO of Planet IQ, and a principal director at Booz Allen. In addition, she has worked for NOAA, where she directed remote sensing and GIS programs for over a decade, and also for several South Carolina agencies such as the Department of Health and Environmental Control, the Water Resources Commission, and the Department of Natural Resources. So a broad, diverse background and experience. She's also the founding chairperson of the National Geospatial Advisory Committee, and currently serves also on the boards of TerraGo Technologies and Wagoneer Engineering. So it is my pleasure to welcome Ann for her talk. Thank you.
Good morning. It's great to be here with you today. And I neglected to stand up earlier when you asked people that if they had been here in the first 10 years of the organization. I think the last time I attended an ESIP meeting, shortly before I left working for the United States federal government, which was about 15 years ago. So I was in that for 5 years. But it's great to be back, and I'm sorry it's taken me 15 years to make my way back here. Also, Ann, I'm surprised we've never met before because we have the same kind of background. My original work and passion that led me to remote sensing was bottomland ecosystems and cypress tupelo swamps in particular. I spent the majority of my formative years neck up into alligators and water moccasins and cypress tupelo swamps. So anyway, I'm here today to share with you Radiant Earth and what we are building there, but also to talk a little bit about how positive I am about the future of remote sensing technology to solving some of the world's most difficult problems. I founded Radiant Earth 18 months ago with the idea that we wanted to expose the world's open data. I think it is still true, although less problematic than it has been in the past, that oftentimes a very large chunk of your time when you have a remotely sensed project is actually finding the data that you need, right? And the world is awash in data now. Whether it's commercial data or open imagery, it is still far too difficult to get your hands on. We have these stranded economic assets. That's the first principle buy down the friction of finding the imagery that you need. I was also interested in creating an organization that was neutral. As you heard in my bio, I spent 15 years working in government, 9 for the United States federal government, 8 for the state of South Carolina, the Department of Natural Resources, the Wildlife Department, Department of Health and Environmental Control, and the Water Resources Commission. I spent 9 years running commercial companies, and all the while being a remote sensing professional. And so I've seen the world from both sides now, so to speak. And I thought that there was a real need for a neutral organization, for a nonprofit, and one that could have transformative impact given the changes that we're seeing with technology. So our vision is open geospatial data for positive global impact, with a mission to connect people worldwide to Earth imagery, geospatial data, tools, and knowledge to meet the world's most critical challenges, of which there are thousands. We are particularly focused on helping the global development community. Now, with that said, our platform is open to anyone. We have a lot of interest from the academic community internationally, as well as here in the US. We have already started to work with some startup companies and are happy to do that to help them explore their potential offerings and whether or not there's a market there in a nice, safe environment, low-cost environment for them. I don't believe that we'll see much commercial interest from ongoing concerns of commercial companies, but we're happy to work with them. And clearly, governments and nonprofit organizations around the world, primarily in the global south, is where we are focused. We're also focused on a broad array of topics. It is not our mission to go out and research or study climate change, or water quality, or sanitation, or global health. It is our mission to help others that are doing that through thought leadership, through community development, and as a back-end infrastructure for imagery. So we already are engaged in projects that cover this span right now. We just finished working with the Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting. They are sponsoring a number of journalists around the globe, primarily in Africa and in India, looking at exposing illegal mining, illegal forestry, and a whole host of other issues, where we've worked regularly with those journalists to help them tell their stories. We have 3 projects ongoing with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Oops, I neglected to mention that. The reason we're able to operate as a nonprofit is funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and from the Omidyar Network to start with. And the reason, and this is important, the reason they were interested in funding Radiant Earth is because both of those other organizations, large philanthropic organizations, have seen the impact, the social, economic impact of using geospatial technologies in their work, in the field. And they're all in. They're more than happy to fund this type of work. But what they weren't seeing, what they were seeing was with each grantee, they were kind of recreating and reinventing the wheel. They weren't seeing the learning between their grantees. They weren't seeing an infrastructure that was left behind and living. So the Gates Foundation and the Omidyar Network, for that very reason, came together to fund Radiant Earth. I would say that other very large philanthropic organizations are also now funding remote sensing and GIS. The Rockefeller Foundation, a whole host of others are very interested in this space because it's making a difference, because they see it as a good long-term investment. I think that's exciting. Having been in this field for 30 plus years, it used to be that we saw the innovation coming primarily from governments, primarily from the defense and intelligence organizations in the United States. That's where the big R in research and development and where the funding came from. I think that has turned on its head. And I think that's okay, because we are making such tremendous progress so quickly. The important thing is that we have the data, the foundation data, and that we're able to act on that. I still think we'll always have open data, but I think the research and a lot of the innovation is actually now coming from the commercial sector, and that's because there's a reason to do it. There's a profit margin on the other side. There is an answer to a question. What we have to do in government or in the nonprofit sector is find the answers to our mission requirements. So let me back up. We're looking at food security and agriculture. We're working with the FAO and a number of other organizations to do machine learning, primarily in Africa, for food security. Property rights, the Omidyar network is very focused on property rights. 60% of the people in the world who live on a plot of land actually don't have title to that land. How are you going to invest in that land? Are you likely to invest in that land if you can't prove that you own it? So there's a major initiative linked to poverty reduction and transparency in government to obtaining property rights. And you can't get property rights without an image of your property, right? Without a map of your property. So these are generally the areas where we're supporting our constituents, our customers, but we're willing to work with anyone in any topic area that aligns with global development. So I started off by saying how hopeful I am, but let's revisit the past, right? Where was the problem? Discovering the data, I already spoke to that. I mean, when I did my graduate research, it took 2 years just to get the data, right? Just to get the data before I even started to analyze it. I was practically all worn out by the time I got the data. Now we're getting a lot of data. In a previous job, when I ran Food Bureau Earth data, we had an XMP band radar system on an aircraft, on a G2 aircraft. And that thing collected 5 petabytes of data a day, all right? And we were flying the Amazon, we were flying Papua New Guinea, and a whole host of other very wildland areas. And I forever was buying air conditioning and more drives. I mean, I was adding $50,000 worth of air conditioning to the server room, it seemed like every week, until we ran out of space on top of the roof to put the air conditioning units. The first time I bought a gigabyte, I worked for the South Carolina Water Resources Commission, and I bought my very first gigabyte, right? That was $24,000 for 1 gigabyte. Wow, that's just amazing. That was a big problem. Cost, the duplication of data, acquisition delays, and the analytics. The analytics were not straightforward. So that was the problem. But I am so positive because these problems are melting away because of innovation and technology advancement. So at Radiant Earth, we really have 3 programs. I'm going to only speak in any detail to 2 of them, the technology platform and community development. The platform itself is to facilitate innovation and solutions by combining the best in discovery and dissemination with the latest trends in image processing. I come back to the AAAS FAIR, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And the platform is all of that. I'll talk to that a little more. Oops. Is that me? No? Okay. And then community development is really to focus on geospatial professionals in the global development community, to create a community of practice there. Many of us have professional organizations where we stay up to speed. It's my observation that the global development community, the geospatial professionals, the remote sensing professionals in this community don't have that glue, don't have a really robust community of practice to stay informed. And our field is changing wickedly fast, right? I mean, I try to keep up to speed with all of the commercial satellite companies and what a number of the governments around the world are doing with new launches of new satellites for Earth observations. And it's nearly impossible. to keep up to speed with it. How in the world can Steve Helen, who works for Catholic Relief Services, and who oversees a team of about 15 geospatial professionals, who are delivering 30 million bed nets in Nigeria, keep up with that, right? So our idea is thought leadership, community development, outreach, and education. And then finally, we will form a consultancy. I hope to put that off until early this coming summer. In actuality, we're consulting with almost all of our customers right now and helping them do a proof of concept on their remote sensing project. But this consultancy will be more focused on the business aspects of remote sensing, and that is, how do you run an RFP? How do you evaluate proposals, right? Many of these organizations really, really struggle with that, as well as first-time proof of concept workflows for a particular project. So again, discover, combine data, right? Search and discovery. Analyze and customize that. The platform is now up and running. We have north of 100 users. We have quit onboarding additional users. As with any new substantiation of software, it is a minimum viable product. We are really pushing the edges. We are in practice right now ingesting all of Landsat 8. All of Sentinel 2B is in. Sentinel 2A, we're now going back through time to bring all of Sentinel 2A in. We have some drone imagery in from our collaborators in Africa. We have some aerial imagery in. And so we're just trying to harden the platform. We've asked some folks that have a good bit of expertise to really beat up on its functionality. They've managed to break it several times. So we're not going to open it up to the public until it doesn't break. But we believe that will be in the March timeframe now. It is all open source technology, and you're welcome to take a look at GitHub and where you can add to that or use it for your own projects. It will scale from local to global, and it will integrate with other platforms. One of the things that I really want to stress about Radiant is by no stretch of the imagination anti-commercial. I've run a number of commercial companies, and as you heard me say, I am very bullish about what's happening in the commercial sector as it relates to innovation and research and development. What we want to be able to do is to expose commercial data in this platform as well, once we are sure that we can protect the license of that data. And we want our users to be able to come in and find the data for their projects. And if they have a GIS or a remote sensing analysis commercial tool set that they'd rather use, we want them to be able to link up to that tool set. So we'll have APIs in there that'll take you right back into your environment, so that you can compute in our environment, buy down the cost again, buy down that back-end infrastructure, but use the tools that your organization support. In our community development, we're getting ready to release our first newsletter. I encourage you to sign up for it at radiant.earth. It's on the satellite remote sensing market. We'll be looking at it broadly, both from government and commercial sector, and then doing a deep dive on the government sector, and then doing a deep dive on the commercial sector, and then looking at what we think is coming next, because I do believe there's going to be some wicked competition, particularly in the commercial sector, which I think should be good news for consumers. As consumers, that's what we all want, is a very competitive environment. And frankly, we haven't had a very competitive environment in satellite remote sensing. We've had one or two anchor tenants, the militaries of the world, that have supported 2 commercial entities. And now we're going to have 15, 20 by the end of this year, commercial entities all competing. We will be looking at use cases and best practices. We'll be talking about what works and what doesn't work. Capacity building and education we'll be doing, particularly in Africa. We're going to start this summer. I noticed a member of the organization, OpenAQ, is on your agenda for tomorrow morning. We're sponsoring and working with OpenAQ to deliver workshops in Africa around open air quality data, so we look forward to working with them on that. We'll also be working with another Bill and Melinda Gates program that's just begun in Africa, which is a very big program called GRID, if you haven't heard about it. The Gates Foundation, as I mentioned earlier, is so positive about geospatial data for their programs, and so concerned about the lack of a spatial data infrastructure for the continent that they have decided to go forward and fund one. So they're kicking off with 5 countries in Africa to build the basic data infrastructure for those 5 countries to start. They have funding from DFID and a number of other organizations as well. And as a part of that mapping project, they'll have some capacity development activities with those countries in hopes that those countries will take root and be able to maintain their own data going through time. And then, so that, I think that gives you a feel for what we're looking at. And I think, you know, as I talked about the challenge earlier, you know, the size of the data, the cost of the data, this is why I'm so positive. This one slide, I think, speaks volumes. And that is, we are awash in Earth observation data. You just look at what's happening in the satellite market alone, and then you overlay that with the drone industry, and particularly the innovation in the drone industry in Africa. I think that's where a lot of the innovation is coming from, because there are fewer regulations in Africa and fewer things to worry about flying into. There is a lot of innovation. An organization called We Robotics, I would encourage you to look up We Robotics, funds drone labs around the world. They're funded by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Hewlett-Packard Foundation. They're using drones for medicine, they're using drones for agriculture, they're using drones for conservation of elephants and rhinos, and really starting to institutionalize it. Cloud computing, machine learning, as I mentioned, we are readying the platform, and I'll speak more to that in a minute. For machine learning, we've already done a couple of projects, but there's still some big drawbacks. So there are new solutions out there, and that's why I'm so positive. So at the end of the day, when you think of Radiant, a year from now, I hope the brand that we have built has all these descriptions, that it's open. You'll be able to find the open data there that's available for your project area. It's neutral. We're a neutral organization. We want to help our constituents find the best solution to their problem, whether it's with commercial products or government products, open data, whatever we can be to support the community. We're collaborative, federated, working through a number of different organizations. I see my friend Christoph here from the World Bank and the European Space Agency. We're working with NASA, we're working with the Indian Remote Sensing Organization, we're working with Code for Africa, we're working for ESIP. ESIP is the organization of the Himalayas, bringing and looking particularly at climate change in the 6 countries of the Himalayas, and Agile, and our ability to lean forward, our ability to focus on delivering a back-end infrastructure, education, and a little bit of cutting-edge R&D for the global development community. I don't want to be on the bleeding edge, but I think we can afford to be on the leading edge. And these are some of our user ecosystems and our partners, again, focused on the global development community, working with business and commercial enterprises, and working with the universities around the globe. So let me talk a little bit about our research and technology roadmap. We did onboard the first 20 users, developers in August. We had 100 users in October. This month, we're kicking off a blockchain project on the platform. Our theory here is that we can use blockchain on the platform to also host commercial data on the platform that has a specific license, and control the movement of that, and to be able to generate trust. Because if blockchain is the trust machine, which the Economist magazine called it, then we ought to be able to use that technology to host commercial data on our platform as well. Right now, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has petabytes of commercial imagery sitting on drives in Seattle, and if they want to share it, they physically ship it, whether it's to the World Bank or to the State Department or to Nairobi, because they want to make sure they don't break the license. Well, we ought to be able to do better than that. And I think blockchain technology will let us do that. I also think blockchain technology will, let me just jump forward to this slide and I'll come back to that one. I believe that we are moving away from the platform economy. We're certainly in a sharing economy. I don't know what I'd do without Uber. But we are moving to a platform economy. And I believe it's the chain that's going to deal with the interoperability of those platforms. Whether or not you're interested in cryptocurrencies, I'm not particularly interested in cryptocurrencies. I do think the underlying blockchain technology is going to connect our geospatial platforms in the future. I think that's fascinating. One of the big drawbacks we've had in this community and why it took us so long to get venture capital is because we could never, and I would say we still don't accurately know the size of this market, right? If you really want to talk about the data market, I don't think we understand it. In the future, when you have blockchain in between every single geospatial platform, you will know who's using what data for what. You add all that up, you'll get a very good feel for the size of the market. I think that in itself would be fascinating. Let me back up. And as I mentioned earlier, so we'll be kicking off that proof of concept. We're working with Consensus on that, which is a blockchain company and a number of other partners. We will have a public launch, we believe, in March of 2018. The platform is a lot more robust than it was in October when we hit 100 users because we're getting all of that feedback, and so we feel good about that date. And then finally, we are preparing the platform for machine learning. We're also kicking off a project to open source machine learning image libraries. We'll be focused in particular on global development issues and agriculture and food security, but we'll, I'm sure, through time, look at others. And we would love for Radiant to be a place where you can store those labeled images in our libraries and use them for your own research in your facilities or work in our environment. It doesn't really matter to us. This is a collective effort, I believe, that all of us in this room have to work on over the next 5 or 6 years, is to label those images for the different sensor suites that we have, so that we can drive the same innovation for science and for the global development community that Orbital Insights and Descartes Labs is driving for the futures market. That's what it's going to take. So we look forward to working with all of you on that through time. And then finally, my last slide, and why, again, I'm so hopeful about the future, is this is a graphic that I saw in an online magazine that I read once a month on ag startups and venture capital. And this is what's going on in the remote sensing ag space right now. Look at all those new companies, right? And they're not just in the US. Again, I think a lot of this innovation is happening in Southeast Asia. I've spent a good bit of time in Southeast Asia this year. In fact, I'm on my way back to India on Saturday morning. That 30-hour flight I can't wait to take. And there is a tremendous amount of innovation in forestry and in ag in Indonesia and Southeast Asia in particular. So behind each one of these companies is investment, because the investors believe there's a there there. And I think you could do the same for many other market verticals. And I think that's good news. I think our community is going to grow and prosper from that. I think we're going to see more data. I think we're going to see more innovation. So with that, thank you.
the data people from that market come here. So we have time for a couple of questions. Again, if you could come to the mic and introduce yourself if you have a question.
Questions?
What?
Mr. Haberman's gonna ask me a question. Go for it.
So, thanks so much for coming in and giving us this perspective from this, I agree, a very radiant new sector in this business. And thanks for coming back to ESIP. You know, one of the things that ESIP I think has done well over our 20 years is to be a venue for interaction between data providers, mostly NASA and NOAA, and with some help from the USGS as well, and user community. So, you know, my question is there, what role do you see for, what role might you envision for ESIP to play in your community outreach element of the equation? Because I think, you know, certainly there are a lot of, I agree completely, there's a change in the world here, and that I think ESIP can bring a lot to that equation, and I hope you agree.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, you know, I was writing down the components of your strategic plan that you mentioned, and one in particular, strengthen the ties between the observation community and the user community. I think that is just so critical. I mean, I agree the socioeconomic value has always been this abstract thing. When I was at Booz Allen, I won a project to look at what was the return on investment of Landsat, right? Huge number. I can't believe it. But I think we're getting there. I think we're getting there. I think more people are looking at the return on investment and socioeconomic value, and I think we're applying the technologies. Problems. Polio is the reason the Gates Foundation is investing in geospatial technology, because they see dramatic improvements in their polio programs. So I think that, but I think a great place for us to work together and a great place to strengthen, and where our community still has a lot of work to do, I believe, is the linkage between the technologists and the end users, those who are going to benefit. I think that needs a lot of time and attention. And as Ann said, we're not always necessarily the best communicators, right? And I think we really need to think about how we explain our technology and deliver our technology to the end users. So I attended a meeting at the Rockefeller Foundation on June 1st of 2017. It's just a one-day meeting. It was the best remote sensing meeting I've ever been to in my life. You know why? It was all about drones, and the people who had the problem were solving the problem. They were the supply chain. It was a very intimate problem, and they fixed it. So it was all about the problem and not about the technology. And I found that really fascinating. Yeah.
Hi there. My name's John Riggy. I work with TED, actually. So granted, the price of drives has gone down a bit since early days, but still, it's probably a substantial amount of costs that you need to run the Radiant platform. So how do you see the approach of having the users of the platform share in supporting the cost of running the platform? Are you thinking to charge per access at some point in the future, or how do you manage that plan?
Yeah, it is costly. We will set up some sort of membership structure probably in about a year, not before then. I mean, we have to have a really solid offering before we're going to ask anybody. We have some very gracious support from the Gates Foundation and the Omidyar Network. We're also engaged with a number of large philanthropic organizations. They see this as a public good. So I am hopeful that 70 to 80% of our annual run rate for operations and maintenance will be covered by philanthropic organizations. and that we may be able to generate 10 to 15% of what we need to pay the bills from a membership structure. And then we will also go out and compete for grants and research projects. We just won a large project in the South Pacific for South Pacific Islands, funding from DFID and the United Kingdom Space Agency to look at climate change. And that's a 3-year project that supports a lot of our work. So we will put in place some sort of membership structure. That membership structure will be highly discounted for nonprofits working in the global development community, and probably for academics as well. And there will be some level of free always on the platform. If you just want to come in and view something, look at a project area, you're not really running up any cost. Now, if you want to do machine learning inside our environment, we're going to have a talk first. It will be, the back-end infrastructure will be a public good, paid in large part by the philanthropic community.
Hello, I'm Kat Tickman with USGCRP. I noticed the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team was amongst your collaborators, and I was curious if you had any plans of contributing your open data to the open aerial map, which underlies the humanitarian efforts, or even to the OpenStreetMap for all general purposes.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So the open aerial map and the open imagery network, which was the business plan idea that I had, originally were kind of one effort. And so we've collaborated all along with the two of those organizations. And because this is a registry technology, we are linked with Open Aerial Map, which underpins OpenStreetMap. Our efforts will look, and they are very focused on supporting OSM, but also supporting HOT, the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Network. And we're very interested in supporting those organizations. We are not focused on actually doing the work that HOT does as it relates to humanitarian response. I think Map Action and HOT do a great job there. So however we can support them, we will. If we can use our infrastructure, we will. But I think they've clearly got a great niche and they're very good at what they do. So we're certainly not going to try to duplicate that. But yes, we've worked with OAM and HOT since the very beginning.
So Anne, I think we have one more question from Gary.
I'm Gary Moats from the Indiana Geological and Water Survey, and frequently when people talk about global development, there's always this phrase bandied about that's called think globally and act locally. How do you, what recommendations do you have and what advice would you provide to those local data providers and spatial data portals and open access data platforms for contributing to a broader network like this and connecting those data providers with those data consumers and users?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I believe that phrase, and I'm very comfortable working locally. All of our projects, I mean, I've spent a lot of time recently with the UN Sustainable Development Goals and UNGGIM organizations. Whew, that's a complicated process. But I think where we, Radiant, need to focus our time is in helping countries and organizations do individual projects on the ground, because all politics are local, all projects are local. So our efforts are really focused on those local projects, not the national level reporting requirements. With that said, this is only going to be possible 5, 6, 7, 8 years from now if we really do have open data structures that are maintained by the countries themselves, hopefully. And that is, you know, technically very difficult in still some places in the world, and politically very difficult some places in the world. And so I hope we'll still march forward, but I reckon back to not so long ago, in 2005, when I ran Earth Data International. We had a contract to fly DC on a regular basis, which put the Secret Service in our aircraft. And whenever we landed, they got the data first because they took the White House off the imagery, all right? That wasn't so long ago. here in this democracy. And I also recently saw a report that ranked the US as 15th in the world in open data policies and actual implementation. So I think we're getting there. So thank you.
Thank you.
And now we'll head out into the foyer for a break, and we'll be back here at about 11.